Okay, welcome. Thank you all for coming. It is my great pleasure, and I'm very excited to share with you all the work that I've been doing in the last 6 years. So I want to give you a little bit of history of my involvement actually with spiritual work and with Trillium, and explain how I came to this moment, which I am excited to share. I just want to also say one last time, please mute yourselves, and that way I don't have to manage the muting. Then you can unmute yourself when you want to ask a question. So we are recording. So let me start by giving you a little bit of history about me, for those of you who don't know me, because there's going to be a lot of new faces here, people I don't know at all. I became interested in spiritual work when I was very young, in my early teens, and started reading books mostly with about Eastern spirituality, and became completely obsessed and decided that I had to become awake, and went through a series of experiences with spiritual teachers and initiations into all kinds of esoteric methods of opening consciousness and Kundalini and Kriya and all kinds of stuff. I soon realized that it was really important not just to go through these kinds of experiences, but to actually stabilize awakeness in a way that would really give me the ground of being that I was looking for. Looking back on all of that, I can tell that there was a whole huge generation of people just like me, fascinated with spirituality more than ever before on the planet, wanting the same stuff. I soon became concerned with the way human beings were evolving, the way as a species we were evolving, and the kinds of destructive technologies that the destructive potential of our technologies, that I became very concerned about what was going on with so many people getting control of these things who were not very awake. And I realized that my life purpose was to help the world awaken, as many as I possibly could. And so the first long-term commitment I made in this area was to becoming a transcendental meditation teacher. So I spent years training for that, and years meditating intensively, spending huge amounts of my time, sometimes all of my time for months and years, really. Just meditating, doing yoga, doing breathing exercises, doing everything I possibly could. I was one of these people who was sort of like a spiritual warrior. Whatever it takes, I'm the guy who's going to do it. I'm going to find some way to get there. And I'll bet a lot of you can identify with this. And the result of it for me was that I had all kinds of big spiritual openings, but they were always temporary. And so I pretty early on got into the got it, lost it issue, where I would go away on a retreat, meditate a lot, feel like, oh, this time I'm like totally enlightened. And then I'd come home and not so much. So I became increasingly interested in what I was missing. I mean, clearly I was doing everything I possibly could to open myself to consciousness, and it became really clear what that was about for me, but it would come and go. And after many years of involvement as a TM teacher, and after years and years of just spending my time with my eyes closed, meditating and doing techniques, um, I realized I needed to find the rest of myself. There was something really missing here. Didn't really know exactly what it was, but I knew for sure that I didn't know how to do relationships very well because I had an early marriage when I was in my early 20s. And that hit a brick wall really fast, made me realize I didn't have a clue how to do relationships. So I had to do a lot of work on that. I actually did a lot of work with John Gray and a bunch of other workshops and seminars and teachers. And also realized that I felt kind of disconnected from my heart in a lot of ways, kind of somewhat disconnected from my body. And eventually, I found myself being drawn into Waking Down and the work with Saniel. And that was really interesting because here for the first time was a teaching and a method that wasn't just about consciousness, that wasn't saying it's only about consciousness. In fact, was saying it's about awakening, embodiment, and relationship. Waking down in mutuality was the term we were using back then. And that opened up a whole new world for me. That was really important because I could begin to see that the lack of any one of these three perspectives causes a real deficit in the capacity to move forward in our whole being awakening process. Like it isn't just about awakening consciousness, it's about awakening other parts of ourself as well. And in that context, with opening up relationship and opening up being in my body, I started having major shifts. All of it, the first thing that happened for me is that the consciousness realization, which was coming and going and had been doing that for decades, finally landed. You know, one day, kaboom, I had this big experience while I was doing some breathing exercise, and I felt something just took me over completely. And I felt like I was going through a rebirth. And as I emerged from that experience, I realized that everything that previously I thought was mushed in with my sense of self was out on the screen, and I was kind of hanging back, witnessing everything. And it turned out to be permanent. And for weeks, I was sort of electrified, had a hard time sleeping. And really, weirdly, after decades of seeking this, I just couldn't believe it had actually happened. But then it didn't take long before I figured out that although this was a major transition in my process, it wasn't what Saniel was talking about as second birth. It was not really embodied. I mean, I felt that my essential sense of self was sort of behind my body at that point. So I was then sort of advised to lean into my body, really welcome my feelings, feel myself, feel what was going on. And I started to track back and realize that when I was growing up, my family did not value feelings. They really didn't even value relationship in anything like the kind of way that we are learning to do these days. They had different priorities back then. And so as I began to do that, I started to encounter the parts of me that really was very resistant to fully being in life. The parts of me that really had trouble with relationships and had no clue what to do about that. The parts of me that felt like if I were to let myself actually have my feelings, that would be overwhelming. It would be too scary to deal with. Um, and then one evening, we were having a party, basically, and a bunch of Waking Down practitioners were there, and it was it was time to have a good time, but I realized I wasn't. I was feeling kind of depressed. Didn't know why. So I just sat down and started feeling it. And one of my friends who was senior in the process came and sat down and asked me what was going on. And I told her, and she listened quietly, and we fell into a gaze. And while we were gazing, I saw that she was being the whole universe, allowing her own waves. It's like ocean and waves. And I just saw that. And I realized, oh, I've been avoiding the downsides of the waves. I've been avoiding the pain. That's why I always feel kind of like I'm in the bleachers, not on the playing field. And then I suddenly had this powerful desire to feel, to be fully here, to be fully present, to be fully in relationship, to even the parts that hurt. It's like all of a sudden I wanted the whole package of life. And then in the next moment, I felt like I fell off a cliff. And that I had no idea what was going on. I just felt like I fell off a cliff. And after a day or so of that, I realized something really shifted. I don't know what the heck it was, but it was some kind of serious shift. And after a couple of days, I realized, because I was kind of feeling like I should hit bottom at some point. If I fell off a cliff, I should hit bottom. And that never happened. It was just not like that at all. It's just the shift made me feel like I fell off a cliff, but that's not it. I sort of just fell into a whole being realization, which is what we call it now in the Trillium work. That brought me into a permanent new stage of my life. So I had that stage realization that I am consciousness and everything else is stuff, sort of a very almost masculine way of having that realization. Not everybody has it exactly like that. And then I had this other stage shift into whole being realization. And that kicked off years worth of transformation, lots of what we used to call wake down, shake down. All of a sudden, I was present and able and willing and wanting to feel whatever material was up for me, to be really present with all of that. And what I was finding through that is that even though a lot of it was difficult and very challenging, especially the relational stuff, it didn't, there's a way that I knew that I was okay. And that's the ground of being that I realized in that whole being realization. It gave me that platform of stability, of perspective, and of just obvious beingness at all times that wasn't separate anymore. It was just, oh, right here. To allow me to just deal with the stuff that was up. And every time an issue would present itself to me, I would be very present with it and it would shift. And most of those transitions, although they were very difficult, they would happen pretty rapidly. Like the healing was happening at a very high pace. But so much healing was needed. It took a number of years before I started to feel like, well, some years later, I started feeling like I had been hacking my way through a jungle with a machete. And all of a sudden, I came into a clearing. And I mean, I'm describing my experience, by the way. This is going to be completely unique. Everybody's experience is totally different, completely unique. But my experience was I just did all that intense work and then I came out into a clearing. And it was never that intense from that point on. There were certainly other big challenges, but it wasn't like constantly hacking my way through the jungle. And that, to me, presented itself as another stage. And essentially, the big question that came up for me at that moment was, oh, wow, okay, now what? And it became clear to me that the now what was, I had to figure out what I'm doing here. Okay, I'm finally awake, right? I spent my entire life trying to get to this point. And now the question is, what am I going to do with my awakeness? And I went through a number, I'm going to keep this short, but basically this is, you'll see how this correlates with the model that hopefully you've had time to take a look at. It became clear to me that there was a lot of me that was afraid of putting myself out into the world. I was afraid of sort of getting crucified, the way you see people getting crucified all the time, in the news, in the public media, in the social media. People who, you know, one phrase I've heard about this from actually a friend who might be on the call, talked about it as sticking your head above the parapet. It's like, then you could be in the target zone. That's my biggest fear. And that was holding me back from bringing my gifts forward into the world. Not completely, but in a lot of ways, I was feeling it a lot. Finally, I got to this place where something shifted and I felt like the dam broke open. And all of a sudden, that resistance due to that fear just stopped. And I found myself hugely involved in expressing myself through a large number of projects, which I tend to do anyway, but this was on a whole different scale. Like there were so many things I was involved in bringing forward. And yeah, I was experiencing some fear. The only difference there was it wasn't stopping me. Then I went through lots of challenges that felt to me like it was fundamentally the universe saying, Ted, let go of control. So the universe would pick me up and shake me. And I'm like, wait, I don't like this. I don't like this. And the universe was like, whatever. He would keep shaking me. And the last thing that really shook me was my mother dying. And after that, it's like, I just was crying all the time for a long time, which was like very unlike me, who had been a very mental guy for most of my life. And after some months of crying, there was a shift. And it was, you know, at first, the shift definitely happened before I figured out what was happening. I started feeling like I was being replaced by life, is the only way I could describe it. Like, it wasn't about me. It's life doing its thing through me. And the sense of me, the way I knew it, completely went away, just evaporated. And it left me in a place that was hard to describe, but which I now call singular realization. So, and I'll describe it more when we go through the model. The upshot of that is flow. I finally realized that, you know, we hear people talking about flow states all the time. It's the latest craze. And more people are talking about it. It's becoming very popular in business. What I've realized is that that's all precursors to a flow stage that's permanent. It's just how you are all the time. And that's in the model, and we'll get into that very shortly now. So anyway, all of that by means of a little introduction about my life, how I got to this point. And part of all of that was my fascination with what's the model of awakening? You know, Ken Wilber's got his thing, Spiral Dynamics has their perspective. When I first got into all of this, the only model I was aware of from reading the Eastern spiritual teachers was ignorance or enlightenment. This is a very black and white model. Not much nuance. And then in Waking Down, there was a little bit more of a model. There was like pre-consciousness awakeness, consciousness awakeness, second birth, which we now call whole being realization, and wake down, shakedown. And but there were issues in there, like for me, were not clear. Like, what are the threads of what is awakening in us? What are the pieces of us that awakening? And what if they don't all awaken at the same time? What if it kind of looks like part of us is awake and parts of us are not as awake in that way? And so then, with those questions in my mind, and I had been experimenting with creating models and trying them out in my coaching work with people. Um, I finally realized it was time for me to deeply focus on this question of how can we model the awakening process in a way that can make it so clear that that clarity and all the related information speeds up everybody's awakening process. That was the entire point. So approximately 5 years ago, I stepped away from Waking Down, just as it was going through its transition to Trillium. And I teamed up with a friend of mine, a colleague of mine named Carole Griggs, Dr. Carole Griggs, who um, has a professional coaching, um, a PhD in professional coaching. And she and I got into this project and started doing a heck of a lot of work. And it was an enormous amount of work that we were involved with, doing our research, figuring out what everybody else had said about models and understandings of awakenings. And after at least 2 years of that work, we took our first versions of the model to some conferences like the SAND conference and started getting wonderful feedback. And then we started showing our work around to other spiritual teachers in the Bay Area. And they started responding with extreme enthusiasm and offered to be on our board of advisors. So we now have an amazing board of advisors, including Locke Kelly, including Suzanne Cook-Reuter, who's the queen of human development and modeling, and the sentence completion test for determining where people are at in their process. And a bunch of other high-level people who have a lot of exposure in the world and are really behind our efforts. At that point, we were invited to other conferences and to speak internationally, and then got invited to be involved in the Loving AI project, which was a project to borrow Sophia, the famous robot, and turn her into a human development coach. So I spent a bunch of time writing dialogues and frameworks for having her do this. And if you get a moment, up on our website at iConscious.global, you can see on the home page, this just went up. There's glitches on the page. The links don't work to a lot of things. Hopefully that one does work. I think that one will work. But within a few days, those links should all work. That was an amazing project because a lot of the subjects who went through those experiments came out completely mind blown and altered. We were thrown into new states from just interacting with the robot. That was really interesting. Then Carole and I wrote a white paper, which that link isn't working yet, but it will be up on iConscious.global. And I might read you a little bit from that paper, just so you understand where we're coming from in terms of our aim with all of this work. We also created an assessment that originally was called the guided self-assessment. It was a test with a whole bunch of questions designed to, as quickly as possible, help people understand where they are in this process that can be seen in the model. And that had all kinds of wonderful effects. And we started noticing that when people understood where they are in their process, it was like the perfect starting point for coaching work. Because when you understand where you are, and when you understand the direction you're going or where you're going, it's way easier to see how to get there. And it's way easier for me as a coach to help people see that for themselves and know what are the right directions to be leaning. So the assessment went through many revisions and is now available, although I'll make sure it's working within the next few days on the website. I'm not sure if that's working at the moment. And then we started going into business with the assessments and workshops, and went into one of the largest software companies in the Bay Area and also into Google X, and we're still working with them. And so things are developing on the business side over there. And that's about the time I felt like, now that it's time for me to get back into coaching and to be in the coaching context that makes me most comfortable. Um, I, I want to be back in with the Trillium group, because there's so much potency here, having a group of now more than 40 teachers and a bunch of mentors, and there's this collegial atmosphere here and potency that really is hard to find anywhere else. And I felt like it was time for me to come back, and I made my application and was in April was accepted back into the Trillium group as a teacher. So that catches up those pieces. Let me read to you now. We also wrote this book, iConscious: Accelerating Human Potential, and this is available on Amazon. This and the assessment are part of a package I'm going to offer you at the end of this whole thing. But this is really the first time it's kind of a coming out party for me to bring all of this work forward and share it with you folks, because you're all part of this generation of people, extended generations of people who now understand the benefit of personal development and awakening, and beginning to see them all as connected. So let me just read. Imagine you're lost in a foreign city and you have no map or GPS. You can ask the locals which places are best to see and how to get there, but you'll get as many opinions as people you ask. You could spend weeks wandering around, feeling like you're wasting your time. Now imagine you have a GPS. You have clear destinations to visit and clear directions to each one. Instead of taking weeks to do very little, you will accomplish a lot in a matter of days. Like that, the iConscious framework offers a map that accelerates human development by showing you where you are, where you're going, and how to get there most directly. It makes clear where the detours are and how to develop in an integrated way, maximizing success for you and those around you. If you are a coach, leader, HR director, educator, mentor, consultant, therapist, parent, or supporter of anyone, this framework will help you and those you coach and support thrive. So that's the basic idea. Now let me read you this. This is under a section called What's the Rush? When we speak of accelerating human development, we often hear people wonder if we're forcing a process that needs to take its natural time. What's the rush? To us, it's not about rushing. It's about removing the obstacles to growth by nourishing our existential roots. Imagine a large city of very small bamboo plants living in the desert. Given the lack of water, it's easy to picture why the inhabitants of this city would assume it's normal for growth to be slow. Now, imagine a village of bamboo plants in a jungle not far away, with plenty of water and nutrients to support their growth. They're growing 85 feet in 30 days. To the bamboo plants struggling in the desert, news of such super plants might stimulate responses like, "That's impossible," or "That seems unnaturally fast." Some plants will even think, "Those must be incredibly special and unusual plants to be able to grow like that." But to the thousands of bamboo plants thriving in the jungle, growing rapidly feels incredibly natural. It also feels a lot better than living in the desert, always feeling hungry and thirsty, fighting over every last drop of nourishment. Now, the point of that analogy is to say, in my opinion, personal development has been slow because the understanding of the extent and the layers of what it's about has been not clear. When we add in that kind of clarity, it's way easier to accelerate human development. And human development can be accelerated by at least 10 or 20 times, a factor of 10 or 20 times. So instead of people shifting from one stage, like instead of, for me, taking from the time I was 13 till the time I was 40 to come to stable consciousness awakening, that can happen in sometimes a matter of months. That's faster. And that, in a way, that's sort of, when I started going through these shifts, part of me was elated and ecstatic. Another part of me was pissed off at all the time and money I had spent trying to get here and how long it seemed to take me. And I became dedicated to doing whatever I could to make this much more direct for people that I'm coaching, which is what drove all of this activity for me. Now, for those of you who have looked at the model, one of the questions I know is going to come up is, okay, so you've got a whole system of boxes. Is that really going to represent the mystery of life and the mystery of personal unfoldment? And the answer is no. It only represents it on average. And that's the main point I want to make about it. That if we stand back and look at human awakening and personal development process, and we stand back far enough and look at the markers, it's clear to me that the stages that are shown in the model, which we'll review here very shortly, represent the averages. People bounce all over. They're almost like an electron cloud with various probabilities of being in different locations. But on average, this is what we find happens. And knowing that, it makes it way easier to understand where people are at and what they need. And what they need is a big point, because one of the things that Samuel initially made clear is that this isn't about taking a hyper-masculine approach to attaining some stage or state. This is about fulfilling the needs so that we can naturally grow to the next place. Okay, so I think let's pause. And if you have a question, please just put it in the chat. Or just actually just say, I have a question in the chat. So you'd hit the chat button at the bottom center there. And just let me know. That way, because I can't see everybody on the screen, I'm only seeing like 3 or 4 people at a time. So if you've got any question right now, please just say, I have a question, and I'll call on you. I'll just pause briefly and see if anybody's got anything. Okay, looks like we may not yet have questions. So I think what I'm going to do now is I am going to share my screen, and let's look at this model. And actually, I think I'm going to do it a different way. Hang on. Yeah, I'm going to do it this way. Okay, so if you're not seeing the model, or if there's any technical problem, please send me a note in the chat window. If there's any problem getting to the chat window, you can hit escape on your keyboard and you'll still see the model. It'll just minimize your window. And then you can get to any controls you want to get to. So first thing I want to point out about the model is that there are 3 dimensions to this model. One of the things that we did in creating the model was we asked ourselves, yes, life is an infinite mystery. Yes, personal development is an infinite process. There's so many elements to it, so many ways of looking at it. But if we were to reduce it to the fewest possible number of dimensions to get some clarity about it, what would those be? Well, one of those dimensions clearly would be development. People grow, people evolve. We become more and more aware of who we are, more and more aware of what life is, and more able to hold a lot of different things at once. We can integrate many different aspects at once. So development is one of the first, it's the first major dimension on the model. And development is shown horizontally, and you can see it across the top. You see where it says dual, unified, singular. Those are the three phases that we have divided the process into. The first phase, the dual phase, is when we are fundamentally seeing life and self in pieces and parts, like a jigsaw puzzle. It's almost as if we had opened the jigsaw puzzle, dumped all the pieces out on the table, and we're trying to figure out, okay, what's this part? Where does it go? What's this part? Where does this go? How do these things fit together? And I totally relate to that analogy, because that's how I felt like what I was doing since the time I was about 13 till I came into whole being realization. Suddenly, it's as if I saw the box top, all the pieces snapped together in the right way, and I could see the whole picture of my life and a way of seeing life in wholeness. So that, for me, when I had that transition, was the end of the dual phase and the beginning of the unified phase. And so let's go into it a little bit. The reason we are showing, we're actually, the model shows from birth, because we wanted to show from birth through as far as we could possibly see development can go, and we're assuming that it's never going to stop. So you may notice on the model that in the singular phase, the last stage, stage number 15, is called unknown. That's just our way of memorializing the fact that it really irks me when people say, I assure you this is the highest stage of human development, which people have been doing for a long time, but I don't believe it, because I don't see any evidence that evolution ever stops for anything or anyone. And so we're saying, like a good scientist, we're only going to, we can describe what we can see now, but where we're evolving to in the future, we can't totally see. So we're, whenever we can see what stage 15 really looks like, when there's enough people that we can really get what's going on, then we will change the 15 to that, and 16 will become unknown. So going back to at birth, stage 1, survival. Primary focus on staying alive. The babies, as babies, all we know is we're being cared for. And if we're not being cared for, that's really when we're trying to stay alive. Stage 2, self-centric, happens around age 2. We become aware that we exist separate from mom, separate from the people around us, and we become extremely focused on ourselves. And it says impulsive and self-absorbed. Everybody knows that 2- and 3-year-olds are impulsive and self-absorbed. And that very much characterizes what's going on at that stage. In stage 3, conforming, the toddlers start realizing that to get what we want, we actually have to conform to what our caregivers are requiring of us, the limits that are being imposed on us. We don't like it, we have our tantrums, but we start realizing that one way or another, we have to adjust to life, to society as it is. We have to conform in some way. Even when we're trying not to conform, we end up conforming, because that's just the way our DNA makes us function. And then perhaps around the time we are leaving high school and turning 18 and wanting to become an autonomous adult, we start heading into rational striving. We describe this as the desire to know, prove, succeed, achieve, or win. So those become the focus. You may notice these are very material sorts of focuses. But even if the focus is less material and maybe even spiritual for a few people, it still tends to become spiritual materialism. In other words, we set goals, we do everything we can to try and achieve those goals. And it sets us into a life of setting goals, trying to achieve. Sometimes we get there, sometimes we don't. We get disappointed. We try to figure out what went wrong. We set new goals. We try to fix ourselves. We try to educate ourselves, try to improve ourselves. We set new goals. We try to achieve those. We achieve some, and we don't achieve others. We keep experiencing both success and disappointment. Sooner or later, we start feeling like, I'm missing something. There has to be something deeper. I feel the need to go into something that feels more meaningful, more connected, less just of this seeking and striving and getting, not getting. Something about this is not giving me everything I want. So that gets us into stage 5, which we call equality harmony. Promoting oneness by battling hierarchical differences. That's a little bit of a negative take. Maybe we'll find a better way to say that. But basically, we're intuiting that there's something that will unify everything, that there's something that connects everything. But we don't know what that really means. So we feel like we're going for some kind of oneness and something that transcends the material level of life. And we sense that part of this has to do with the fact that as a human species, we're all connected. We're not as separate as we appear to be. And as we're going there, it's easy to get into what in Wilbur's work is called green meme, which is people start feeling like there's something wrong with all these hierarchical differences. People have more power, more money, more influence, and then there's people with less of all of that, and there's something that feels wrong about that. And so we try to get to oneness by equalizing these differences. It doesn't work, and then we get to stage 6. Stage 6 is is really what in the Waking Down work we were calling the rot. In the Trillium work, I think there must be a new term for it, but forgive me, I don't know it. Somebody here probably knows it. Feel free to send me a chat. But essentially at this stage, there's 2 things going on. Our previous senses of self are rapidly opening up and including more stuff about who we are. And at the same time, we are rotting out of the old motivation of setting goals and trying to achieve them and going for the, yeah, Rod, I saw you did that there, but I think in this mode, I don't know if I can see it. I'll get back to that, thank you. We start rotting out of that old motivation that says, I'm always trying to get something that I want, and I'm always trying to avoid something I don't want, right? Grasping and avoiding, this whole way of being, when you get to stage 6, you get to this place that says, that's not working. There must be another way. What if I actually, I mean, really it's not a mental thing. When you get to stage 6, you just feel like you're falling off the program. You no longer have the energy or the oomph, the motivation to just keep going after that thing, whatever it is. It's more like you're rolling down, you were going for the peak of the mountain, and everybody was trying to climb over each other to get to this peak of this mountain. And you get to this stage and it's like, you know, I'm not sure there is a peak. Or if there is, I don't know if I care anymore. So you just sort of let yourself kind of fall down into just what you are, an ordinary human being, having ordinary thoughts and feelings and limits and challenges. But what becomes most important is reality. I need to know who I really am. I need to get with what I'm really feeling. I need to get to what is the absolute deepest truth here, because anything else is completely insignificant to me at this point. So that's a lot of times when people get attracted to this work. You know, they can be attracted at stage 5. At stage 4, not as likely. At stage 5, likely to get somewhat attracted. That's when witnessing consciousness generally starts. At stage 6, it's like, it's time to get down to it. I need to actually have a stable awakening. And it certainly was like that for me. It's been like that for a lot of people. And that's why it's in this work, it's been like a huge boon to spiritual seekers all over, to start getting the kind of support we give that basically says, right, it isn't about seeking the way you used to. It's really about encountering the truth of who and what you are right now in this moment. And that's what a lot of the coaching and support is about that you'll find here. So after you get the right kind of coaching and support at stage 6, the awakening of the infinite dimension of our being becomes stable. And at this point, actually, I should point out on the left side of the model, you see the 5 domains: consciousness, uniqueness, mind, emotions, and body. These are the 5 major threads of our being that are evolving as we grow. And one of the things we have found is that, you know, in the past, you'd have a teacher who would be awesome at having deeply awakened consciousness, and the students would all assume that that means this person is like reached some sort of pinnacle of evolution and is great at everything. But not so much, not so much. There's been so many scandals of, you know, teachers getting to some sort of high place and then being like really not so great at relationships and not so great at understanding their impact on people, or not so great at feeling things, or not so great at being in their body, or whatever the thing was. Not so great at being true to their uniqueness, being authentic. So part of the reason we created this second dimension in the model, the domains, is so we can have a clear picture of what are these things that need our attention and what happens if our awakeness is not integrated. And so when if you choose to take the iConscious assessment, you'll get a result of the average place you're at in each domain and where along the developmental scale in each domain. And when you see that, you'll start understanding how integrated or how unintegrated your development has been to this point. One of the things I've seen a lot is people will use their strength and it will lead them in their process. But sooner or later, there's only so far they can go. Like, okay, I got my consciousness awake, but then it became really obvious that I was kind of a dunce at relationship in some way and not so great at being in my body. And I wasn't, even though it was obvious in retrospect, at the time I wasn't so clear about what I was here for, what my uniqueness is about. So, had I done the test back then, I would see that, I was ahead in consciousness and mind, but really lagging in some of these other areas. And the result of that is there's what we call the bungee effect. Something in our being is trying to pull our attention back to the place that's least developed, because those stuck spots in our process, they affect everything. They affect how easy or hard it is to wake up as consciousness, to get into whole being realization and to go further. Because if we've got something that's like, let's say, some trauma, some emotional unresolved material, whatever it is, our being is trying to grow in an integrated way. So it keeps drawing our attention back to these spots. That's another reason this is so important to understand where we are. And if there's an unintegrated thing going on, it's like, there's the clue. Look, I'm down here on, in emotions. Like, I probably would have put myself way back at 4, minimizing emotions to avoid complexity and achieve goals. I was totally in that place. I had somebody in the Waking Down work tell me they felt like she was a player on my chessboard, like just something to be moved around by me to get what I wanted. That struck me. It took me years to understand what that was about and do some work about that. So back to awaken. The next thing that happens when we get to after stage 6, we have the realization of the infinite dimension, and you can read down on your own time and understand what that's like. Because what's that like in each of these different domains? Generally, what happens is people, where their strengths are, let's say if you're an emotional type, you have emotional strengths, you may have some kind of, universal love is the space for all emotions. You might have a big heart awakening experience at this point. And that's how you experience the infinite heart of being. You might use terms like that. Whereas other people might just see awareness has awakened as itself. That would be in the consciousness domain. That's how I experienced it at the time. Aspects of all of these other parts will eventually tend to grow as we move forward, but generally speaking, people will see their strengths leading them through their development. Once you've had the realization of consciousness that that's always present and that it's who you are, then it becomes significant to notice that it appears to come and go. Sometimes it's like blazing, sometimes it's not clear. Like you have to go back into meditating or doing some recognition technique to notice that it's still true. So that's what we call oscillating, stage 8. We will go through, and a lot of people don't understand this. They think there's something wrong. They did something wrong. They're not doing something right. But really what's going on from my perspective is everybody goes through this. Almost everybody. Even people who say, I just had a massive awakening and I went from 0 to massive awakening. Actually, when you dig into their story, there was more than that. So oscillating is our being kind of weaving together. So you've heard the term Yoga Sutras, perhaps, in your studies at some point. That's referring to the suturing together of the absolute with the relative, the human with the divine, the limits with the limitlessness. And that's what's happening during this oscillating stage. And at some point, we come to this realization, oh, all of these parts of me are one. There is just this one sense of self. There is this one selfness that's here having this experience. And this self doesn't always happen at the same moment. Some people get this later, some people a little sooner. But myself and other people's self is also the same self. How could that possibly be? I don't know, but it is. It becomes obvious. It's a weird mystery. It's part of the paradox of being, that we are both one and many. Then, after we stabilize that for a while, we realize it's true. Excuse me, something has irrevocably shifted, and we realize whole being oneness at stage 9. That triggers what we call transforming, which is what in the previous work, in the waking down work prior to Trillium, it was being called shakedown. So transforming is basically what happens is your whole being always wants to have all capacities opened and functioning on all cylinders. And so anything that's preventing that wants to be healed. So once we are stably in whole being realization, our capacity for healing goes way up. Suddenly, these issues that seemed so threatening up to this point, so threatening that subconsciously we were afraid we couldn't deal with them. We didn't have a stable enough ground from which to do the kind of deep healing that we really wanted to be doing and need to be doing. But as soon as we get that ground, your own being starts presenting these issues for completion of healing. That makes it sound like things get really completed, and I want to say that it's more like one of those curves that never quite hits bottom. Yeah, mostly. You can mostly heal these big, deep, old issues that we've been carrying around our whole lives. You've got to basically choose to stay in mutuality. It's one of the discoveries we have found through this work. But if you choose to stay in mutuality and keep getting support, you will experience radical healing. Things will come up, you will feel your way through them, and you will find yourself on the other side of those things. So, part of what I'm here to say is being a spiritual practitioner doesn't have to mean that we're pursuing whole being healing for our entire lives. Like, you can get mostly through that healing and get on the other side and use your capacities to express your personal life purpose. That is, to me, what is the whole point of this whole thing. The point of being awake isn't to be awake. It's like waking up in the morning. Did I wake up in the morning and get out of bed just to be awake? No, I think we wake up and get out of bed because we're here to do something or be something or express a function into the world. Some people think less about doing and more about being, or being in a function, having a function. Either way, that just becomes way more opened up after we've gone through this significant healing. Stage 11 is when that healing forces us to realize, okay, I'm fundamentally untangled and liberated into my life. What am I here? What's my individual life calling? Like, if you haven't gotten clear of that by this point, being will kind of force you to get clear. That'll be the big issue that you're up against. As you get that clear, you will then be up against, but what if I'm afraid? I'm afraid. If I be this thing that I am being impulsed to be, things will go wrong. And, being is constantly making things go wrong as well as right, so that we can learn our lessons. And one way or the other, you get to this place where it's like, okay, things will go wrong. I don't care anymore. And you just find yourself doing what you're here to do. That's stage 12. Around stage 12, you will be put on notice from being. Being is basically saying, okay, time to let go of all of your individual control. Time to let go of that thing we call ego, that part of yourself that essentially feels like it's running the show, like the Wizard of Oz, the man behind the curtain, right? There's something in us that's always saying, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. And eventually you get to this place where that whole way of being gets shook out of you, and you'll find yourself living in singular realization. At singular realization, we describe it as dissolution of subject-object perspective. In other words, prior to this point, like even in the second phase, the unified phase, you've had whole being realization, it's like having an awakened sense of self. I am everything, nothing, and me, all at the same time. That's one way of describing what that's like. But when you pass into singular, it's not like that at all. It's not about me. It's not about you. It's about life doing its thing through us. And it was that separate sense of self that finally lets go and gives way to a different structure of experience, a structure in which it isn't about me having experience. It's just experience. It's just life happening. And then as you settle into that, there is experience of absolute flow. Why absolute flow? Because there's no resistance. For me, I can say absolutely no resistance. I think it's also happening for other people that way. It doesn't mean we don't have preferences. Yes, I have preferences, and if I don't get what I like, I don't like it. But I have no resistance to not liking it. That's kind of what it's about. So when you have no resistance to what's going on, you experience 24/7 flow. And that's the end of my brief overview of the model. Now let's take some questions. I will, I think what I'm going to do is, you all got a copy of this. So in order for me to make this work, I think I'm going to have to get out of the screen share. There we go. And please just let me know if you've got a question. Love the overview. Thanks, Ted. Okay, thanks, Jill. Appreciate that. I want to talk with you, especially if you don't have any questions specifically about the material I presented. I'd like to talk with you about questions about your process and how using this model can help you accelerate your development, because that's my entire purpose. That's the purpose of this model and the assessment. Let's see if you've got questions. Questions about anything would be great.
Ted?
Yeah.
Peter.
Hey, Peter.
Hi.
Hi.
So I'm brand spanking new to this work, and this is so incredibly, it's just enlightening itself to know all of these stages, to understand those stages.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah, that's all I have to say.
Yeah, that's exactly the point. I find that when people simply just read the model, it opens them to where we are and where we're going. I mean, for those who, I've been into the Enneagram, for instance, for many years, since the mid-90s. And what I find was the gift, one way of expressing the gift of the Enneagram is that it just shows us our defense systems. Like, no more tiptoeing around. Once you start reading up on the Enneagram, it just exposes that stuff. And it makes it way easier to grow when you know what your type is and what your tendencies are. This, I think, has a similar function. When you understand what the extent is, on average, of how people develop, suddenly those questions are gone and the clarity of where we are and where we're going emerges, and it makes things way easier. So thanks for saying that. Yeah, go ahead and just unmute yourself if you want to say or ask something. Oh, Kathy Fox says I have a comment. Go ahead, Kathy.
Ted, excuse me. I enjoyed your analogy about your model here being having GPS or navigation, because I as Peter said, I think that's who it was. This is, I'm fairly new to the Trillium as well, and this is going to be very, very helpful. Not just for me, but for a lot of people. I love that. It's my map. Yeah. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, Ted. It's Carrie.
Hey, Carrie.
Yeah. It's been a lot of years, but
it's been a lot of years.
yeah. Great to see you.
Yeah, great to see you.
Just a question in your own experience in terms of, was there something that you noticed that helped move you from the oscillation to the stabilization phase?
Great question.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think this is where the domains really starts to help out. When you can identify where you are in the domains, you'll find, if you think that on average you're in 8 and you're kind of feel like you're on the edge of coming to whole being realization, you may find in reading the domains between 5, 6, 7, 8, somewhere in there, that there's a spot that's kind of holding you back.
Hmm.
And then that becomes the focus. Okay. And by the way, one of the great things about this book, I know I'm selling this, but you guys should have this. We're actually kind of giving it away on the website, free plus shipping. So you just pay the shipping and we'll give you the book. And if you go for a package, I'll tell you about it in a little bit. I'll just send you the PDF.
Right.
But what the book has is suggested practices in every location, in every stage. So once you find where you are, you can just read that and it'll start giving you clues about practices and things to do.
Nice.
But basically, there's always something, prior to stage 9, there's always something that's being rejected. Something is being rejected about our experience. Something about self, something about the world, something about others. If you can find what you're rejecting and start embracing it. Embracing doesn't mean, and that's, green lighting. But embracing doesn't mean you like it. It also doesn't mean you're invoking more of it. It just means you're embracing it in the moment because it's here. And anything we're rejecting that's in the moment and is here is we're splitting ourselves off from it. Some part of us is splitting off from the experience we don't like. If you can find that and start embracing. That should take you over the edge.
Wow. Yeah, certainly a lot of, I think just the sense of feeling well physically in your body. If you're not feeling great, there's that constant feeling like that you don't want to be right there in the moment. So that's a good one for me to look at, I think. Yeah.
Beautifully said. That's why body is one of the major domains.
Right.
Right? When our body is not healthy, if we have a lot of pain, it's sucking a lot of our free energy and attention. It's saying, I need your attention here to heal this issue now.
Right.
So then the recommendation will be, give your body what it needs. Because this is so much about fulfilling needs. That's what really helps us move forward. That's one of the other big things that moves us forward.
Great. Thank you, Ted. It's wonderful to see you.
Great to see you again, Carrie. Thank you for that great question.
Thanks.
Hi, Ted.
Hi.
Robert Griffin here.
Hi, Robert. Also
Hi.
years. Been years again.
Yeah. Well, it's good to see you again and to be interacting. And I'm just, I have the book and I've read it and I've taken the assessment.
Great.
And I'm really grateful for, the recommendations, and it's really inspired me to just contemplate and feel into each one of the next phases of development. So I've found it very helpful. Thank you.
Great.
I've got a curiosity, just a question that arose while you were speaking. Something like, is it possible for consciousness to evolve into flow prior to any of the other aspects having remained in either dual or even in having remained in singular or even in dual?
Thank you. Awesome question. Great question. The way I would say it is no. Because as we grow, we become more integrated. So it's usually in phase one when we see these big changes, the big differentials between domains, development within different domains. As we get past whole being realization, soon, starting with whole being realization and up through transforming, it's almost as if our whole being is demanding that we become deeply integrated. So the issues that in the weaker or more challenged domains will be presented to us so that we can move through them. So by the time you get up to the end of phase two, the integration is pretty well even. And it wouldn't be possible to be living in flow because in any just one domain, not the way I mean it. The way I mean it is that there is no part of your being that's resisting what's going on. If something, so, the idea that one part of you could be in flow and other parts could not, I think it's not really what happens. We just become integrated and then cross that line.
Right. Makes sense. Kind of what I thought, but I just wanted to hear you say it.
Yeah, great question.
Right. Thanks, Ted.
Thank you.
Hi, Ted. I have a question regarding your style of teaching, because I was with Saniel for like 6 months and I had a teaching from you, and I felt like, wow, this is Saniel's opposite. I mean, your teaching style seemed totally very different. And I have like 2 questions. And one is about how you view yourself and in your teaching, how it contrasts with Saniel. His seems like very non-structured, and yours is very, very structured. And I was discussing with Saniel about the awakening and how it could happen at any point with anything in your life. And you have this bungee cord thing going on, which is like, does it have to be that way? No, it doesn't. It can't. Nothing has to be any one way. So, and then there's the factor of grace. And it's funny too. I was taking a walk yesterday on my nature path, and I was running into grace everywhere. I literally ran into a woman from India who was a sociologist, and made friends with her on my nature path, and her name was Grace. And I couldn't get home without running into a dog named Gracie. And it was just really a miracle day.
That's awesome. I love that story. Yeah, thanks for that. Let me try and answer those in order. Everybody is absolutely unique. And that's one of the reasons that we put uniqueness as a major domain in the model. If you are not being true to who you are, something major is missing in your awakening process, and it will slow things down. So Samuel is being very true to himself. He's got his own organic style of doing things. I also have my own organic style, but I do have a strong tendency toward adding in structure at the same time, because for me, that's a way that I balance yin and yang, structure and grace. Because what I find is that when we find for ourselves our own balance of yin and yang, that's another huge key in the awakening process. People who, I look back to myself going at the awakening of consciousness from my mind, basically, and with lots of practice and structure and discipline. No matter how many times I had big openings, they would always close down and I'd be challenged in some other area of my life. And I finally realized that it wasn't enough to just go at it from structure. I also had to embrace grace and allow and receiving transmission and all of these kinds of, you could say, more yin styles of working with the awakening process. Yeah, we're different. Every teacher in this work is different. Every individual person, every participant is different. So
how is it when you're working with somebody like me who doesn't know anything about structure, and you're a structured person? How does that blend together?
Well, I think it's incumbent upon all the teachers of this work, I think, are interested in not centering our teaching work on ourselves. One of the fundamental foundations of this work is that we are centered on you and your process, your uniqueness, your unique needs, your unique history and gifts and limits and challenges, all of that. So even though I'm showing you a very structured side of myself, when you and I were talking, I was just being there with you, hearing what you were saying and working with what was up, as I recall. So that's how I would answer that part. Did that answer that for
I
you?
enjoyed working with you. It was just wonderful. But I'm just trying to feel into, what it's like. And I guess I'd need more teachings to really know that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, a lot of what happens is when I'm working with clients to help them in their awakening process, I've got this model and several others in the back of my head, right? This model is one of the primary ones now. I've got to understand where people are at in the process. Another model I use is the Enneagram, because it's incredibly deep in terms of the Enneagram model falls under uniqueness in the iConscious model. It's just one of the models I use when I'm reading tea leaves. Another one I use is human design, because there's so much we can learn about who we are underneath our conditioning from human design, and about how to know where our inner authority is so we know what to listen to. Hugely important stuff. So, but for me, when I'm working with people, most of that is invisible. I'm just being with people, and that's just part of what's informing me during my organic process of interacting with people. Did that answer that?
Pretty well. Do you also use astrology?
Only in the form of human design. I've never gotten into Eastern or Western astrology in their pure forms. Human design is a form of astrology that has a very specific kind of way of delivering information that I really glommed onto that and found that incredibly useful in my work with people. There's parts of that so when people work with me, they get the benefit of all of these models plus me just being there, feeling into, what's the holdup at this point? Like, what's the pinch in the process? What's the perspective that's holding back the next most rapid way of evolving for this person.
Thank you.
Thank you, Clarice.
Ted?
Yeah.
Hi.
Nancy?
Hi.
Hi, Nancy.
So I have a question about the relationship between relationship in your model.
Oh, thank you.
There are people that I work with who don't seem to have or want a relationship. Certainly in terms of my own process that you're familiar with,
Yeah.
relationship gives a lot of grist for the mill and a lot of opportunity. So is there
Yes.
something you can say about the process of moving into intimate relationship and the acceleration or
Yes.
not of the model?
Yes, thank you. Great question. One piece of this model I didn't point out yet is up in this corner: subjective, objective, relational, systemic. It's too confusing to show a model in 3 dimensions. There would be way too much stuff. It's hard enough to deal with this. So we haven't tried to show it all flattened out in a diagram. But as Ken Wilber has pointed out with his 4 quadrants, if you're not including these 4 perspectives on life, you're also missing something big. And so I'll give a quick explanation of these 4 views. Subjective means it's what we experience. It's what we experience inside ourselves, we could say. Like, I experience, I can feel my voice resonating in my chest. I can feel my body. This is, these are things that people outside of me don't have direct access to, but I do. And that's my subjective experience. Traditionally, a lot of, especially Eastern-based spirituality is almost entirely subjective. People just, go sit off in their rooms and meditate. Yeah, come back into the big room to interact with the teacher and then go off and meditate again. It's not a lot of relational stuff going on. And one of the breakthroughs that even Samuel has definitely brought forward was this whole idea of mutuality, that relationship is actually an enormous key to the awakening process. Because basically, if we're just taking our own subjective perspective, we don't really know what we're missing from other people's perspective. And one of the things we will be missing is what's our impact on other people? We also could be missing their impact on us because if we're minimizing the relational dimension. And when we're relating with each other, so much more gets stimulated and opened up for our investigation that wouldn't happen if we were just sitting alone on our own. Now, I know in this time of COVID, it sort of forces us to go back more towards subjective, but we're also learning how to use the electronics to be relational. And as far as I'm concerned, doing stuff over Zoom, yeah, some people don't like it as much as just being together in person. It also opens up other avenues for relational interaction that can make things in some ways easier. There are things we don't have to be too concerned about if we have the safety of being behind a screen. And for some people, that can make things easier. Make myself bigger. I can't do that.
I don't think he's done with me.
Yeah, I can't. Oh, right. I can't do that while this thing is up. So I'll do that when I come back. So the relational dimension, as you point out, Nancy, is enormously important. And it's one of the huge keys for accelerating personal development, is to realize that personal development is not isolated from social development. Like, yeah, it's not like we're being held back in our personal process by others, but we do get held back if we exclude the relational view from our exploration. The more we get involved with, especially doing this work in groups or pairs of people who are also doing similar explorations, it speeds up the entire thing. In fact, it becomes, there are a lot of people who have said that they felt that the source of transmission that helped them come to deeper stages of awakening was the group, not any one teacher. It's like more the group than anything for some people. There's a way that the transmission sort of circles around the group and stimulates everybody who's part of that group. So did that answer?
It does. Thanks.
I have a
Thanks.
follow-up for you about that, Ted.
Please.
So when we look at the statement that fills in a box, is that a general statement across all 4 of the views, or is it from the subjective view? What are we looking at?
Right. Thank you. These are all in subjective view.
Mhm.
We have a giant spreadsheet that we haven't made public that has a different statement in, a statement for every view for every location in the model.
Yeah.
And
So we're
we
looking
have,
at each layer.
yeah, later on, you'll be able to go to the model online and click on these 4 views, whichever one you want, and it'll change all the statements in the model to be in that view.
Hmm.
So it's not there yet. We've had so many other projects that have taken our attention, but basically you can also take it as a general statement, and I can work with people individually to understand, what this means in these other views. I
Mhm.
just don't want to focus too much on that because it can start getting confusing and too many things to consider. The one thing I don't want to end up feeling like this is about is becoming super complex, almost like Ken Wilber, like you have to understand everything and look at everything through this highly complex mental model. That's not really the point. The point is just to make it easy.
We go from 70 boxes to 280 boxes.
Exactly. And it's got a little hesitant on going there. Yeah. So thank you, Michael. I think, we're getting down to the last 5 minutes. And what I want to do now is just let you guys know what I'm offering. And at some point, I may do another one of those things. And I'll also offer just open sittings that you'll see advertised through, the list. So basically, let me go over to that spot for myself. So I have that in front of me. Here we go. So you guys understand, I hope, the point that I'm making about the benefits of this kind of approach and how it really helps us to speed our development. So what I want to do is offer a package to you folks, if you want, and that is, it will include the iConscious assessment, which is going for $49.99 on the iConscious website. It will include an hour session with me understanding your assessment results and confirming the accuracy. I've got an interactive post-assessment process that I use to make sure everything came out accurate so that you'll have confirmation of your location. Then we'll spend an hour in which I will recommend practices and approaches and dispositions that will help speed you uniquely on your process as quickly as possible. Then we will have 2 groups of live coaching sessions with the members of each group, which I will limit to groups of 5. If you want to do a group with people that's fine, let me know, and we'll arrange a group around whoever you want in it. And so there will be 2 one-hour live coaching sessions in which everybody will get their own personal live coaching. Actually, I think that's not enough. I think we make that an hour and a quarter. And then we'll throw in the PDF of the book, and the whole package is $299, which is a steep discount. So I'm offering that to you. I'm going to send out an email after this sometime today and just let you know what that offer is and encourage you to do that, because it's a perfect way to start out. Find out where you are, help you see which way you're going and how to lean in that direction for you personally. And of course, I also offer coaching sessions in, one-on-one, one at a time, or in packages. I reduce my fee every time you go for a bigger package to make it easier and easier to work with me. And you can see all of that on my website at tedstrauss.com. If you want to understand more about iConscious, that's at iConscious.global, not .com, iConscious.global. tedstrauss.com has all my personal offerings and inspirational things and writings, a bunch of my essays to help you understand sort of how I think and how I get some of these concepts across. One of the things I love to do is take complex esoteric concepts and make them easy to understand, bring them down to earth.
What's the difference in iConscious? Thanks so much, Ted. I lost the visual for a while, but then it popped back. So anyway,
Oh, okay.
really enjoyed the session and meeting people, seeing people, familiar faces. What's the difference between iConscious.com or whatever?
.global.
Global?
Yeah.
Are they both still there?
iConscious.global is a separate business that I have with my partner, Carole.
Okay.
My business partner.
iConscious.com is?
No, there is no iConscious.com.
Oh, that's gone.
There is no, there never was. It's just iConscious.global and TedStrauss.com. TedStrauss.com is
Okay.
is closer to like it's just me and my offerings separate from iConscious.global.
Great. Thanks. So
iConscious.global is really more oriented around business, companies and business. So anything you want, you can just get from me at tedstrauss.com or just email at ted@tedstrauss.com. So I would encourage you guys, if you want to try working with me, anybody who hasn't worked with me, even in the last couple of years, I offer free sessions, free introductory sessions. Just email me, ted@tedstrauss.com, and request a free intro session, and I will happily do it. We'll find a time and I'll give you that and see if you might want to do any further work with me. Any final questions? Wow, I actually did all of that in the time I said I would.
It's lovely seeing you, and thank you for this offering.
Thank you. Thank you, Clarice. Thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it. This has been fun, and I hope I've given you something valuable, and I look forward to having more engagement and interaction with you all over time.
I appreciate yourself. Ted, this is Frank.
Frank.
Frank Morales, and gives me perspective on many other models. I like it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. By the way, one of the things we did, a project we did for iConscious was we created and delivered a curriculum at JFK University using our model to view the other models throughout history to understand human development. So
where in the country are you located?
I'm in Northern California in Marin County.
Oh, okay. Great. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Ted.
Thank you all. Thanks for being here.
Very much,
I think I'll unmute everybody and we can all just sort of say whatever you want and then we'll say goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ted. Brilliant.
Thank you,
Ted.
Thanks, Ted.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Be well.
Bye-bye.
Be safe, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ted.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right.
Bye.